right? My name is Jeff Mengler. I work for Hain Associates, and I'm the current president of the Fox River Ecosystem Partnership. And I'd like to welcome you all here today to our April Noon Network, which is something we do every other month. It looks to me like many of you may be new to FREP, not our quote usual crowd. But one of the things we do at the beginning of each of our meetings is we go around and have each of you introduce yourselves, say who you're affiliated with, if any, and that will also give our speaker an idea of who he's got in the audience. And then I will introduce him and we'll get on with our program about coyotes. So let's start over here and we'll go around the room, just say who you are and your affiliation, if any.
Al Craybill, Arlington Heights.
I'm Candace Jacobs, I'm the Christopher Work Engineering. Katie Meyer with Dundee Township Open Space and FREP Secretary.
Hi, I'm Jerry Tang, a wildlife photographer, love taking pictures of coyotes.
Carolyn Jukowski with an Elgin and 53 acres of wildlife, lots of coyotes in it, lots of animals.
Awesome.
Wow.
Dan Figwood, I live in Lincoln Hills, Illinois.
Karen Miller, planner with Kane County Development Department, and fabulous Fox Water Trail with Fox River FREP.
That's an official name.
Coyote, University of Illinois Extension, and wildlife coaching firms.
Kevin Bradley, I'm a board member of the Illinois Patent Council.
Susie Myers, Kane County Farmville.
Marilyn Ziegler, Isaac Walt, Lady
Okay.
Lou Stutz from the west side of Elgin, and also a member of Abode, which is a Mars of Leopold along to Elgin.
Karen Matthews, and I'm just a neighbor down the street, 25 by Trout Park, so we have plenty of coyotes.
Yeah.
Retired scientist. Trish Beckford from the Conservation Commission and Park Board member.
Trish Police, Dundee Township Supervisor.
Martin, Dundee Township Trustee and King County Board, or King County Planning Commission.
Joe Becerra, I'm just having interest.
Nancy Williamson, Illinois Department of Natural Resources.
Hi, Steve Byers with the Illinois Nature Preserve Commission.
Phyllis Crosby, Animal Nut.
Carrie Kelly, I'm the president of the board of directors of the Elgin Math and Science Academy, which are your new neighbors.
I'm a dual board member
Yes.
with the Elgin Math and Science Academy and Friends of the Fox River and Coyote Affectionado.
And Gary, what's your name?
Gary Swick.
And I'm Edna Swick, and I live here.
Richard Aaron, Dundee Township, also your neighbor.
Cindy Cava, and I just want to tell people, you know, they have all kinds of misconceptions about.
Yep.
I'm Kathy Janik, and I'm writing an article for the Chronicle.
Gary Gloaz, I'm a King County Forest Preserve District volunteer.
Kathy Gloaz, also a volunteer for the Kane County Forest Preserves.
And I'm Ann Camp, and I live not too far from here either. And I'm here because we have coyotes in our subdivision, so I can find out a little more about them.
Lois Lawton, I was strongly persuaded to come back home on the East Coast to help with the family farm.
Carolyn Campbell, trustee of the Henry County Conservation District.
Eleanor Mike, no affiliation, just came to hear the talk.
Bill Cox, it takes a man to wear pink.
Notice that. That
A
caught my
day
eye
laborer
before.
for Nancy.
But you match nicely.
Nancy Cox, citizen.
Joanne Westland, Sleepy Hollow resident.
I'm with her.
Bob?
Jerry Such, West Dundee.
Mike Ander, the Juckus Creek Fox River Watershed Coalition.
Susan Swain from Elgin.
Greg Laws, local resident.
John Schmeckler from Streamwood, I'm a wildlife enthusiast.
Kevin Gorski, I'm from Palatine, just a local resident interested.
Okay. She has no voice. Maggie Sola from Applied Ecological, and she's actually my vice president of FREP. Do we have others that step in? Nice try.
I'm Lisa O'Brien, I'm with the Renal Discovery Center by the Central District.
And I'm Becky Cole, Communications Manager for FREP, and I've got coyotes in my backyard in Batavia.
All right, so obviously we hit a good topic and we brought in a good speaker. First, I'd like to thank Mark Ganshert for setting us up here to be able to use this wonderful facility at Max McGraw Wildlife Foundation. Way back when FREP was started in 1996, we had a lot of our early planning meetings here at Max McGraw when, I guess, was it our first or second president was on the staff here at McGraw, so he could get us in. And it's a fabulous place to meet, so thank you for hosting us.
I would just like to welcome everybody to the foundation, let you know we're pleased we could host your noontime meeting here. I think you're in for a real treat. The guest speaker, Stan Gehrt, was a staff member at McGraw years ago, and now is nationally known for his work with Coyote, so I think you'll really enjoy it. And again, welcome to McGraw.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. So without further ado, we'll turn over to Stan Gehrt, who's affiliated with McGraw here and with the Ohio State University, and who's been specifically studying our coyotes for quite a while.
Thanks for that introduction. So, as I start, can everyone hear my voice?
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. All right, good. Hopefully you'll be able to see some of the images on the screen. I've tried to make things fairly big, but we'll see how that goes. We'll have some video clips. You'll be able to see those pretty easily. As Clark and Jeff both mentioned, I've had the fortune of being the PI of this project. We started this back in 2000, March of 2000. So we just passed our 17th year of this study. So it's the largest study that's been done on coyotes and one of the longest, definitely the longest in an urban setting. I'll go a little bit through the history of coyotes. Why are they showing up in cities now? And then I'll share with you, I'll just take you on a quick tour of what we've been doing over the last 17 years. I can't go over everything, so I've kind of picked some of the highlights. And hopefully I'll be able to leave some time for some questions, so you can, if I skipped over some things too quickly, if there's something that you were really interested in that I didn't go into enough detail, you'll have a chance to ask me those questions. So first of all, a little bit about the animal itself. So coyotes are a canid, so they're a member of the dog family. That dog family is what we call the Canidae. And so, at least in North America, that represents wolves, coyotes, and foxes. And you'll see a gray fox and a kit fox there, and a red fox. We have both red and gray foxes here, at least to some degree. And then, most recently, within the last, well, it varies, but right now, possibly around 30,000 years ago, we had a new canid show up. That's that one. So it turns out that actually isn't a new species, that's a wolf. And I know that doesn't look like a wolf, but that is a wolf genetically. So it looks funny here, but I want to point out as we go forward, one of the biggest conflicts that we have with coyotes living close to us are occasionally when they attack dogs. And so I just want to point out that this family group is a really unique group within the mammalian world. So they differ from many other mammalian groups in a lot of different ways. I'm not going to go through all of those. But they definitely interact with each other following certain rules. And one of the important rules that they have been following for, in the case of coyotes, over 1 million years, that's how long a coyote has been a distinct species, is that the big dog kills the smaller dog. And it's not for food, it is a dominance thing, is to reduce competition. That's what is ingrained in them, and it's been ingrained throughout their evolutionary history. So wolves kill coyotes, coyotes kill foxes. Not always, and in fact it's dependent on resources. So when food is abundant, they become more tolerant of each other. But when food declines, they become less tolerant, and they become less tolerant during this time of year because they are dropping litters and they're going to defend their litter. So you can imagine, so coyotes can identify wolves, they know what those are, they can identify foxes, but you got to give them a little bit of a break because they have to look at these things and try and figure out what is that and what am I supposed to do. But if you consider that this has been an ingrained behavior in them for quite a while, it's actually an amazing thing that in all likelihood we're going to go through today and tonight throughout the Chicago area, and there's probably not going to be a coyote attacking a dog. In fact, that's the norm here, is they don't actually attack dogs except for every once in a while their instinct takes over. That we're actually preventing them from expressing what is a really strong instinct. So it's actually, they are actually working for us most of the time, even though we don't see that. We don't see it when they don't attack our dogs. So the other thing that's really unique about coyotes in particular, so in contrast to the red foxes and the wolves, coyotes are a uniquely North American species. So they're not found in other parts of the world, at least, well, they're down in Central America, and I'll get to it in just a second, another part of the continent as well. So this is their historical range. This is kind of a modified, or it's actually a hybrid map of 4 or 5 different projections of what we think coyotes, how they were distributed prior to European colonization. So they are a Midwestern and especially a Southwestern species. But now, their current distribution is that. So they've more than doubled their geographic range, and in fact, that map is out of date. So in addition to studying coyotes in the Chicago area, I also studied coyotes up in Nova Scotia, Cape Breton Island specifically, and you'll notice that the range map doesn't include my own study area. So they're actually found in all provinces of Canada and found all the way up to the Arctic Circle now, which is a struggle for them, but they're able to do that. And now, most recently in the last 2 years, coyotes have crossed the Panama Canal. So we also have to extend that map over down to South America. So their range increase hasn't stopped yet, and they've also increased the number. So the other thing I want to point out is most of that range increase has occurred in the last 50 to 60 years, and those are decades when we've had some of the most intensive predator management taking place across the U.S. And in fact, most of that predator control was actually directed toward coyotes. In fact, there's been more coyotes killed than any other mammalian predator. And in fact, today, we still kill a coyote about every minute across the U.S. and parts of Canada. So the larger predators, which were also targeted, the wolves, some bears, mountain lions, they decreased their range. So they had huge range contractions, especially wolves. Coyotes withstood all of that pressure and they expanded their range and increased their number. So they are a pretty unique animal. And, the range expansion now includes new habitats. And the newest habitat for them to move into and colonize are the cities. And it's a very ironic thing if you think about it. So we are their biggest predator. So we kill more coyotes than any other animal. We kill them every single day. And so what do? They move right next to us. So they have a sense of humor. And so, of course, we're studying coyotes here in Chicago. So coyotes were found here in small numbers throughout the last century. And then something happened in the 1990s and they began increasing in number. And it wasn't just Chicago where this happened. So that particular decade has been important for most Midwestern cities and a lot of Eastern cities that didn't typically have coyotes living there. And it was because we had a huge drop in trapping pressure. So pelt prices crashed at the end of the 1980s and early 1990s. And so they actually increased the number, and so then they moved into the cities. But in those early 90s, they were still just found periodically in certain parts of the Chicago area, usually around the forest preserves. And no one really thought of coyotes being able to live actually among you. So some of you mentioned that you're sharing your subdivision with coyotes. Certainly downtown, who would ever think that a western species, especially a wilderness type species, would be able to survive there? So I'm going to show you that they do. We didn't think they could either. So that's when we began the study, was right at 2000. It was in response to this increase in coyotes appearing in certain parts of the metro area where they had never been reported before. And we didn't know what to make of that. Was that bad? Was it good? Is it temporary? So we began capturing coyotes and trying to understand some parts of their ecology. So we started off trying to answer some very basic questions, such as where do they go? Where do they go in relation to us? Are they a risk to our pets? Do they carry diseases that we need to worry about? And also, is their population going to continue to grow? So we looked at population dynamics, which we're still doing today, because it turns out that we haven't yet discovered exactly what's going to regulate coyote numbers here. There's space use, so that continues for 17 years. We're still looking at that, especially in relation to us. We're very curious about, as each generation of coyotes are born and raised in close proximity to us, does their space use change? So in the beginning, they very clearly tried to avoid us as much as possible. But as their numbers have increased, they also push themselves into more and more compromising areas and closer to us. So whatever patterns we saw when we began this study in 2000 might be quite a bit different today. We're also looking at a disease. So that actually pays for most of this research. And then their food habits, and that's actually a really important thing. So it sounds pretty simple. And I'll show you the technology has advanced dramatically, again, over the course of this study. And so now we can look at an individual's diet over time by analyzing a single whisker from that animal. And I'll show you what that looks like. Their social structure, so I'll talk a little bit about that today, especially their mating system. So I mentioned that the Canidae, that dog family, is unique among mammalian groups, and one of the ways that they're unique is that they are monogamous. But what we found, especially in the avian world with birds that are also monogamous, is that when you genetically test them, you find cheating going on all the time. In fact, that's the rule. And it makes a lot of sense evolutionarily. So you don't want to put all your eggs into one basket, such as it is. So the same thing is true for wolves and red foxes, especially as their numbers grow, then you find cheating going on. And so obviously we were interested in coyotes, and coyotes have never been genetically tested to see if their mating system is truly monogamous or not. So that was one of the things we wanted to test. Their ecological role, I'll talk about that, in terms of how they impact other wildlife in the system. So we don't just study coyotes. That's a misconception that people have about this research. The population genetics, and then most recently, this is the new thing that we're looking at just in the last couple of years, and that's behavioral syndromes, or another way to say that, that's personalities. So we're really interested in individual variation among different coyotes and whether or not we're selecting for certain kinds of personalities. Not intentionally selecting, but just through the process of living close to us. Are there certain personalities that are more successful than others? So real quick, in terms of how we do this work, we live capture the coyotes. We collect a variety of different measurements from them. We ear tag them, we radio collar them. Often it's the trapping of the animals without catching pets and without catching people is the real challenge to this, and it's actually why you don't see or hear very many studies like this. It's extremely difficult to do. So far, we've been able to do it without getting McGraw sued. So far. So here's some of our animals. That's actually a fecal sample being collected. That's One of my favorite coyotes is coyote number 1. She started off the project in March of 2000. That's us recapturing her 10 years later. And we followed her for over a decade. She was an amazing animal. We have to look at their teeth. Their teeth are probably one of the most important parts of their body. So coyotes can do quite well without a leg, without a foot, without their tail, without their ears sometimes, but they don't do well without their teeth. That's coyote 500. That was a milestone animal right there. An animal about to be released. So we follow them physically. So that's what we call VHF collars. Almost all of them get the VHF collar. So we have teams of people that go out day and night tracking them. So you'll see our vehicles and the draw vehicles with the antennas on top. So that's what they're doing. We also have now, because the technology is advanced, GPS collars. And so we also have special animals that have a special collar that is located by satellites. And we tend to focus those downtown because it's physically hard for us to follow coyotes down there. And then we also collect samples for disease and genetic work as well. And then in addition to capturing the adults, we go into the dens. In fact, so coyotes only breed once a year. So they've mated in February. The peak of their mating happens to coincide with the peak of human mating. So when you peak, right? Everyone agree? So February, what happens in February? Valentine's Day, right. And it turns out, it's not just a bad joke, but at this latitude across North America, the peak mating period of coyotes is exactly February 14th. So, and then they carry that litter for 2 months, and now, right now, this month is the big one for giving birth. And so they're dropping litters at the moment. We wait for a certain period of time, and we go in physically into the dens, one time each den, and we mark their young. So we take little microchips, the same microchips you use for your cats and your dogs. They're uniquely coded so that, and they'll be permanently marked, that unique code, so that when we capture them later as grown animals, then we'll know exactly where they came from, exactly who their litter mates were, and their parents. And we also collect either hair or a few drops of blood for the genetic work, so we can genetically test whether or not a litter comes from a single set of parents or multiple individuals. So here's just a few pictures of those litters. And so this looks like a really nice natural den of these animals in a wilderness area or wild area. But if you turn the camera to the side, you can see this. It's actually right in a subdivision. And that's one of the biggest challenges for these coyotes. This is the most important time of year for them. It's raising the litter. Everything that they do year-round, defending a territory, interacting with other coyotes, keeping other coyotes out, their whole mating system, everything revolves around this litter. And so they need to try and find, and they work really hard at this, to try and find the most secluded, most protected area from us. Now some of them are living in areas where they don't have a whole lot of place to put that litter. So they end up having to adjust their schedule and the way that they raise their litters if they're really close to us. Some more litters. And then this is, they also use some human structures. So these are pipes or areas. This is just across the fence from O'Hare International Airport, another pair of coyotes that we became pretty fond of. And so they had a litter of eight pups in those pipes. Some more urban dens. So measuring some pups. This is your typical 4-week-old pup, so that's one of the perfect times. We try to go into the dens when they're about that age. They're still easy to handle. They haven't really developed their personalities completely at that point. You'll notice that their eyes are still kind of blue. At 5 weeks, that's when they start to begin to develop different personalities. So you'll notice some of them becoming more bold and aggressive, others very shy, and their eyes are beginning to turn the characteristic yellow of the coyotes, another 5-week-old pup. So that's another good age. At 6 weeks, now they're looking like a coyote. And this is about the time when the parents are going to take the litter away from the den, go to a different part of their territory, and they won't use that den again for the rest of the year. So again, it's another misconception that people have about coyotes that they use dens around year-round. They don't. They actually don't like to go into holes in the ground. They can help it if they're healthy. So they move that den. So our goal is to try and get into those dens before they get to 6 weeks, because once they become mobile, then we have no chance of catching them. Just some more pictures of our pups. So in addition to those techniques, we've been collaborating with National Geographic for the last few years. You may or may not have seen some of this on some of their specials, but to repay me, basically they loaned an engineer to the project, and they developed a coyote cam. So for the first time, so that's the very first model that I'm putting on a captive animal. That's actually a coyote that we caught many years ago. Yoder, he was actually someone's pet that they had released, so we couldn't let him out. And so he became our study animal for a little bit, just to get the right angle of the camera, because it's never been done before. And so I'll be showing you some video clips. In this case, we can actually have the coyote basically recording what they're looking at. And so you can see that it's going to be hanging down below his chin and following the angle of his head. So this is what it looks like. At the top of the screen, you'll see the chin every once in a while drop down, and we're just following that coyote along. So this is a wild animal. This is not Yoder. This is 673. And so that's what we're trying to get, is that view right there. So when you see some of these, I'll show you some ones here in a little bit, some brand new ones. So what we've got so far is we're up to almost 1,180. I think we just broke 1,180 a couple weeks ago. And then we've radio collared over 500. The difference there is that we can't radio collar pups. So those are the only ones we don't actually collar. So we've marked quite a few pups from a lot of litters, and we have caught 2 dogs and 2 humans, which is a really good success rate. I mean, to go 17 years and only catch 2 dogs and 2 people is pretty good. So one of the reasons why we go into those dens, in addition to taking the samples from them, is that we need to know this. We need to know how large the litters are, because coyotes scale their litter size based on resource availability and whether or not their population is growing or if it's going down. So, or if it's plateaued. If it's plateaued, they start to drop their litter sizes. But if their litter sizes are large, that means that the population is still growing. And so for most of the study, for about the first 13 years or so, this was a typical litter size. So that's 11 pups, and we know that when we genetically test them, they're all coming from a single pair of parents. So that's one mother, one father. So the other thing that makes the coyotes or the canids unique, and you might ask, well, why would they be monogamous? And that's, by the way, that's what we found, is that in our study, we just finished another big block of analyses. This is the largest genetic study of coyotes, and over 16 years, we haven't done our most recent year, 16 years, we have yet to document a single incidence of cheating. So they don't cheat, which is extremely, extremely rare, even within their own group. So wolves, red boxes are like the worst cheaters. There's actually over 50% of your typical red box litters are coming from more than the pair. These guys don't. And one of the advantages of being monogamous is that they can raise litters like this. So that's a huge litter. You'll never see a litter of raccoons like that, ever. You'll never see a litter of bobcats that big. The reason is because they don't have the male helping the female raise that litter. There's no sense in producing more offspring than the mother can take care of. But the canids, it turns out that monogamy makes that male tend to that litter every bit as much as the female. And also, their other pack mates, their offspring from the year before, if they stay, they will also help raise those young. So those have actually a really high survival rate. So this is an aerial image of the Chicago area. I'm just going to show you over the last few years, this is what it looks like. These are the territories of the coyotes that we followed, at least for like an 8-year period. And all I'm trying to show here, these white lines, is that the vast majority of our work has taken place up here in the northwest suburbs. But if you can see it, if you go down to the center of the city, you'll see some polygons down there, and that's new. And so I'll be talking about what we're finding for these coyotes down in the city, but most of what I'm talking about here, such as those litter sizes, are coming from the suburban coyotes. So, and in fact, when we began the study, we didn't think, and there weren't examples of coyotes actually living downtown, and we didn't think they could. But it's over the course of the study, their system forces excess animals to explore and try new areas, and so that included downtown Chicago. So that's ages. I'm going to skip that. So one of the things that we can do by looking at their survival rate and their reproductive rate is we can model their population to determine if it's going up or down. And I'm not going to go through all of that, what that means, except that that red number says 1.41. That means that we estimate that the population for most of those years was growing at about a 40% rate. So, which is really impressive. In fact, they're producing excess animals, and so we have a lot of our animals that are dispersing from Chicago to other parts of Illinois, other states. Wisconsin gets a lot of Chicago coyotes. Milwaukee, we've had half a dozen coyotes leave Chicago and move into Milwaukee. So the Chicago population was what we call a source population. So a lot of people would think, well, it's pink, because living in the city would be bad, so they would have a high mortality rate. But no, their survival rate's very high, and that's actually what we call a source population. So the Chicago coyote population does not rely on the input of coyotes from outlying areas. They produce excess within.
Why does the slide, the map that you showed where all the coyotes were moving, not show anything to the north or south? Is it, I assume there are coyotes there as well, is it just that they're not part of the study?
Yeah, so, and I'm not including all of our animals. In fact, that was just over a certain block of time. So, and we, again, it's just to illustrate where we focus most of our work, which is in the northwest area. But yeah, we definitely have other animals that have moved down south and to the north. So this is just reiterating what I've already told you. They only produce a single litter, so their whole success for the year relies on that single litter. And the litter size can range anywhere from a low of 3 to up to 17 animals, pups.
Oh, wow.
And I told you about the genetic analysis, and so this is just recently, this hasn't been published yet. So overall, we've looked at 68 litters, almost 700 animals, and again, every single litter has come from a single pair of parents. In addition to their mating system, so the way that the social system of coyotes is structured, you have the alpha pair, so that's the pair of animals, the male and the female, that are actually breeding. They're the dominant animals, they're usually the oldest animals in the group, and then if there's enough food, they'll have some subordinates. Those are their offspring from the previous years that are still living with their parents, but they're not sexually mature. When they become sexually mature, stuff happens. So that's when you get coyote soap opera stuff going on. And then you have the pups of the year. And then what we're finding is that the territory sizes here are quite small. It's usually less than 2 square miles. The solitary coyotes, these are the animals that of both sexes that have left their parents' range and are out there floating around. They're looking for a mate, and they're looking for a territory. They have much larger home ranges, usually about 15 square miles, but some of them can be up to 200 square miles. And if you think about trying to move over an area of 200 square miles in the Chicago area, it's pretty impressive. And I'll show you that they learn traffic patterns. They learn how to cross roads. So this is what it looks like in terms of what we do around here. So this is a map, and you'll see a few yellow dots there and a bunch of red dots. Those are the locations of a single alpha male, so that he's the dominant male of a pack. This is Crabtree Forest Preserve, just as an example. These are satellite locations, and the yellow dots are daytime locations, the red dots are nighttime locations. And I just want you to notice two things, and this is typical of all coyotes. So you'll notice that you can easily see what his territory looks like, right? So you can see the edges quite clearly. Coyotes have very well-defined edges to their territories. So that's one thing. You'll notice that the spread of his locations within his territory is pretty evenly distributed. So they're using all parts of their territory. So keep that in mind when we actually move downtown. Because when we move downtown, it's going to be a different pattern. So the other thing I want you to notice is that those edges, they correspond with roads, right? So you can see the roads. And so you might be inclined to think, well, those roads are boundaries for them, and that's why there's such a sharp edge there, is that animal has a hard time crossing those roads. But those roads around Crabtree are just basically 2-lane roads for the most part. That's no challenge for a coyote at all.
Is that Crabtree at Southern Illinois, or?
What's that?
Is that Southern Illinois, or?
No, this is Crabtree Forest Preserve up here.
Okay, yeah.
Just down the road from here. So you might think that the roads are causing the issue. What they're doing is that they're using the roads as the feature of the landscape to create their boundaries. But they're not, it's not because they can't physically cross them, and it's not because it's hard for them to cross, it's just something convenient for them to mark and keep other coyotes out. And it's actually other coyotes that are keeping that coyote from moving out of that territory. So if we expand it out, so those red dots are still him, to the south, those yellow dots are an alpha animal from a different pack, and if you go to the east, those blue dots are the alpha animal of another pack. So now you can see that they carve up the landscape in very discrete territories. Those are your resident